Nice to have you with us once again. I had a grab hold of my mate Shaun Latter, the wealth manager at Quaestor Wealth Management, because this conversation actually started in a pub with a mate of mine. Most of my conversations usually end up starting in a pub. A mate of mine who was talking about possibly moving to Botswana and immigrating. And we started throwing around questions about finances and all the rest of it. So I said to Shaun, come on in, let's talk about immigrating and immigrating your finances. The reason why my mate said he was looking at moving to Botswana, he said, was firstly a lifestyle thing. Secondly, he said by doing that, he can still service his clients in South Africa. He only needs to be here 1 week of the month physically. The rest he can do by internet and Skype and all the rest of it. But he said, if he moves his tax regime to Botswana, he said he would instantly be earning technically 20% more, which I thought was a fairly good argument at the time in the pub. But then, mind you, we had a few beers by then, so it may not be. Let's look at this now. Yeah. People who are wanting to immigrate. How do you go about it? What do you do, and where are the benefits and where are the downfalls?
I think the first thing is to have a look at it and say, well, when is it I can immigrate?
Sorry, nice to have you with us.
Nice to see you too, Jeremy. Yeah. I think the first thing is to say, well, you could be immigrating physically, but from a financial perspective, it may not be as simple or clear-cut. A classic example of that, you gave Botswana, and there's a couple of others where they're known as a common monetary area. So Namibia is another one. So many of our neighboring countries fall out of the formal definition of immigration when we look at finances. So I think for the purposes of the discussion, let's forget the common monetary areas, which really is just going to be, well, you don't have to do anything, and focus on those people that are going abroad. Okay. And what is it they have to do. Again, from a physical point of view, there's a lot of logistics and practical things that have to happen. I think one of them is that you have to apply for formal immigration, okay, which happens through the Reserve Bank. At the same time, you're going to have to go to SARS and get tax clearance from them. Right. Once those two boxes are ticked, so to speak, and you've been allowed, so to speak, to formally immigrate, then you go through the process of saying, okay, so what is it that I do around my finances, and what can I take, what can't I take, and what are some of the implications around that, because there are quite a few. In recent years, we've seen that the exchange controls in general have relaxed an immense amount. I mean, it wasn't that long ago before you could have a maximum of R1 million that you can take out the country ever.
What is it now?
Well, it went from 1 million to 2 million, and then went to 4 million, and now we've got 4 million per calendar year. Okay.
Per person?
Per person.
So you could,
as long as you're over 18, yeah.
Yeah, so technically you can take off, between you and your spouse, you can take off R8 million a year.
8 million, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and if you're formally immigrating and you're a widow or widower, you get the 8 million as well. So at the end of the day, the exchange controls are actually quite relaxed, and we're in a situation of saying the only restriction you maybe have is how long it's going to take you to get all of your capital out. So family, you're getting the 8 million. Remember, everyone gets a single discretionary allowance that they don't have to apply to SARS and for tax clearance of R1 million. And then there's a whole lot of travel allowances that are allowed depending on how many children there are and what ages there are, etc., etc.
But I would imagine that you have got a core of individuals who are looking at immigrating for the same reason as my mate, where, for example, I know that there are developments that are there's a development that I was reading about the other day in Mauritius, where I think, and I'm not 100% certain of the numbers here, so don't trust me 100% here. But if you invest a certain amount of money, it's over $500,000 or something in property in Mauritius, you are entitled to residency, which in my mind, and I may be wrong once again, would mean that if I can have residency there and I'm resident in Mauritius for more than 148 days of the year, I can then transfer my tax base to Mauritius and be taxed at a much lower rate. Am I sort of... You're looking at me as...
No, I'm with you 100%.
I'm wondering if I shouldn't have one of those jackets on, because you're looking at me as maybe a little bit crazy.
No, there's a couple of examples of that. I mean, Mauritius is one of them. I think the other one I heard of the other day was Malaysia. You take $1 million in rand terms, and you promise to invest it in their economy, whether it be through a cash or a stock market or even fixed property investment. They will give you residency to that country. What you have to remember, however, especially when we're looking at working individuals, the South African tax revenue has got agreements with about 80 countries now to make sure that you don't have double taxation, so you're not getting taxed in two places. So if, for example, you do move to the UK as an example, but you maintain a rental property over here, they're going to say, well, first of all, both of those work on a residence-based taxation system. So where am I resident? Okay, and the first thing they look at is ordinary residence. So I think the definition they use is where you come back from your wanderings. What is it that you call home? If it's a UK, then that's where you're going to get taxed, and you have to declare your worldwide income. Similarly, in South Africa, if I'm an ordinary resident here and I call this place home, anything globally that I'm earning from an income perspective, I need to declare and pay tax in this country. So that's the first part. Then they look at physical presence test. Okay, so if you say, well, we're not sure if you're a resident of South Africa or the UK or many of the other areas, let's apply the physical-based system. And there's a couple of things that they look at there. The first is they're saying, well, yes, you're going to have to look at the 91 days. So are you spending more than 91 days in the country? Okay, doesn't have to be consecutive. Are you spending 91 days here in this country? Tick yes, you say, right. Then, in addition to that, have you done that in the preceding 5 years? If yes, then they say, and is it a total of more than 951 days over the last 6 years? And if you say yes to that again, you're going to get taxed in this country on whatever it is that you have from a global income perspective.
So you've got to be very careful about where you put your head down to sleep.
Absolutely.
If you're going to start doing this wandering number.
Yeah.
There also, and this is, we're going way off the mark here once again, but there also are, I think there are two ships at the moment. One I think is called the Residency, and then I can't remember the name of the other one, where that was their main selling point. They were targeting very high net worth individuals, and you could be on board the ship, and you're a citizen of the world.
Effectively, no, yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
From a tax point of view, evidently some of these high rollers were buying into these suites, which were costing millions of US dollars, because they knew if they stayed on the ship for a certain amount of time. And look, it's not a bad life, just cruising around the world.
Think of those things, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're a sort of non-resident, so your whole tax system falls away. But none of us have got that sort of money, so let's just dismiss that one. From what I'm gathering here, there are a lot of technical issues at hand, and you've got to prove a whole lot of stuff, and it's not easy.
No.
It's going to be difficult. Let's then change the focus of this conversation, and let's talk about immigrating your money, not necessarily yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's becoming a lot easier now, isn't it?
In terms of immigrating your money?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, the exchange controls have pretty much opened it quite widely from a money perspective. But again, if we're looking at it, there's a couple of things that they look at. Yes, the money is the one part of it, and I gave you the figure of 8 million for a family unit, 4 million if it's just an individual. But they're going to keep on giving you that every calendar year. So that's the one side of it. What would happen if you did decide to say, well, I'm going to take the 4 million and whatever I've got left over, I keep it here. They're going to put it into a blocked rand account for you. And then whatever properties, whatever assets, anything that you own, upon formal immigration, basically what's going to happen is within the Reserve Bank, they've got the Financial Supervision Department. And they'll make sure that every one of those assets, every one of those investments are tagged to say that we're the authorized dealer, which will be one of the banks, is looking after that. And if any tax becomes payable, whatever the case may be, then we need to make sure that SARS is getting their chunk. One of the other sides which a lot of people don't think of is, one might say, well, I'm going to formally emigrate. I'm out of here. I'm gone, and no longer going to stay in South Africa. However, I'm going to keep a whole lot of assets here, and investments, or whatever the case may be. Upon your successful application of formal immigration, it is then seen in the eyes of SARS from a capital gains tax perspective that you've made a deemed disposal. And then they're going to turn around and
even though you
come
haven't,
pay.
okay, so you've got a house at the coast and you've got a house in Joburg. You haven't physically sold them because you're renting them out now. SARS is going to look at those and say, what's their worth? What did you pay for them? You owe X amount in capital gains tax.
You spoke about technicalities. Property is the one area that they're not going to look at for that. Okay, so they say movable property, we're not going to worry about. A company that's got more than 80% of its assets in immovable property, we're not going to look at that either. But any investments that you have in the stock market, in any of the unit trusts or endowment structures, whatever the case may be, they're going to say, we're going to deem that you've sold those assets, and we're now going to come and ask for our capital gains tax. Of course, if you do sell them, then capital gains tax is a natural event anyway. But they're hanging on to that as well.
But how can they do that? Because you haven't sold them.
It's a deemed disposal. It's the same as when you die. You don't dispose of certain assets because you've perhaps bequeathed them to other people. They're going to say, you've deemed to have disposed of that asset. It's done. It's gone now. So the tax when we look at formal and financial immigration is critical, and getting the tax situation right is very, very, very important. The one other area, and I think most South Africans sitting out there have either got some kind of an RA or pension fund or provident fund or whatever the case may be if they're with employers. That's an interesting area as well, because what's happened specifically in the retirement annuity space is they've allowed you to take all of your money out of retirement annuity and take it with you. Okay, so that's a big plus for retirement annuities and how they're being applied. Of course, there's a couple of things that you have to make sure are in there.
Of course.
But I think that's quite a useful thing to have. Again, you're looking at some pretty punitive tax regimes that are applied to retirement annuities in the same way as any withdrawal from a retirement fund would.
Let's get back to this one in just a moment, because we have to go to a break. Shaun Latter is my guest in the studio this evening. He's from Quaestor Wealth Management. We'll be back in just a moment.